The work that we've been doing on the organizational dynasty framework takes on both a theoretical basis as well as obvious practical application. A couple of years ago, I had the privilege of completing a Ph.D. in organizational leadership, where I specifically zoomed in and researched the concept of succession planning within not only the modern organization, but also from a much further historical point of view. There were a couple of key critical factors that we realized during the research phase, and going over to a more case study, qualitative environment, we realized that these concepts are very much present within organizations throughout the entire globe. Some of these points I would like to share with you today. First and foremost is the fact that when we talk about succession in an organization, we're not talking about a mechanical process of just reappointing someone when there's a job vacancy or perhaps the person retired or transitioned. When we talk about succession, we're talking about a very human-orientated process. And again, this is why we study succession planning not only from the modern organizational context, but from a historical point of view of different kingdoms and monarchs and groups of people that had to ensure that that legacy continues. A second point that came to mind is the fact that when we talk about succession, we are talking about a process. It is not just a once-off event of getting a new person into a specific role, but it is a process of, as I like to call it, raising sons and daughters inside of our own household. This is a process of reproduction. On average, when we look at different organizations, what we would usually see is about 30% of people coming through the ranks, 70% new people constantly joining and then again leaving the organization. Yet when we study examples of organizations that understand the heart of what succession is all about, we would see that statistic literally switching around, with 70% of the people growing through the organization, 30% of new DNA, fresh people coming on board to make sure that the organization itself continues to grow and evolve. If leaders had to ask me today, Marcel, how long does it truly take to raise a successor that already possess the skill set? I would guess that you need at least 36 months, about a 3-year period in which true succession takes place. Now, that doesn't mean we put somebody in a classroom setup or they're in apprenticeship the whole time. There is a process connected with this. But to try and do this in a typical 3-month probation period, there's quite a small chance that you're effectively going to create a successor that's going to carry on a legacy and a dynasty. The next point that is important when we start talking about that, when we talk intergenerational, for instance, from the Strauss-Havel generational theory model, we need at least 15 to 20 years of a gap period in the biological age. If it is less than that period, it is not truly yet intergenerational succession. Yes, we might find a successor that takes over just the key role, whether it's then again a senior management or a C-suite role. But if we're talking about a legacy that becomes enduring, that sense of immortality in the organization, we need to understand that leaders must invest not only in their colleagues that might be a couple of years younger, but truly focus on the next generation, which still has a long way to grow, perhaps in obtaining the right skill set. The final point I want to share today is that there is a big difference between true succession and just leadership diversification. In many organizations, I have seen, for instance, the owner and founder of the organization moving from that C-suite role into a new description and then just finding a person to take over that role and responsibility. That is not yet succession. That is rather a diversification of new leaders coming in as the organization continues to expand and to grow. Succession only truly takes place when the leader moves out of that environment. Again, from a kingdom point of view, it's when the king would say, my season, my time in the big chair, in the throne is finished. I am moving out of that seat in order to make space for my son to come and sit in the big chair and allowing them now to make the big decisions. But why don't we really see that? Not even in history. Why do we see that the king has a tendency to hold on to that seat for dear life? Why do we see so many leaders, especially first generational entrepreneurial leaders hang on to that seat for dear life, and it seems very difficult for them to hand over to the next generation. Well, if we explore this construct just for a little bit, there is a very obvious reason why this is a challenge. Most of the time, the entrepreneurial leader will be looking for a similar leader than themselves to take over the big chair. The problem is, an entrepreneurial leader will very seldom find another entrepreneurial leader to take over from them, because by definition, that will make the second generation not entrepreneurial. The great entrepreneurial leaders will not succeed someone else. They will actually be out there busy building their own organization, which means at best, the second generation leader that the entrepreneur can find is someone who is much more a corporate kind of leader, someone that brings establishment and stability into that environment. Yes, there are indeed ways to work around that challenge if you see yourself as an entrepreneurial leader, but that takes a very special kind of investment where you raise a group of young men and women and allow them to pioneer on the side of your organization, either through entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship. And by the time when the day comes when succession needs to take place, to harness the greatest from those young men and women that you allowed the space to build into this company and to build new ventures and create new avenues of opportunity of business development within that organization. We need to think smarter about setting up our organizations for the future than just working harder and trying to find somebody through the principles perhaps of meritocracy, where the merits of the individual is the only thing that counts. Rather asking the question of who truly carries that legacy, who truly has the ability to think towards the future and can drive this organization into the future. This is the theoretical base of what the organizational dynasty is all about. In my next conversation, I will unpack what we call then the organizational dynasty framework. A little bit of a model, if we want to call it that, of how you and I can consider establishing this also inside our own organizations.